Hey everyone, I'm going to show you how to refinish some revolver grips. This one here is just a Pietta 1858, but you can do this with pretty much any revolver. So let's get to it.
Alright, so the first step is basically to mark the high spots on the grip. Mark whatever you want to remove. Just kind of, feel it and see which spots don't feel right. And then just mark them with a pencil. Now you simply have to take the grips off of the frame and you're ready for the next step. In order to really prep these grips for refinishing, you'll have to use either denatured alcohol, as I use here, or you'll want to use acetone. Either works. This is just what I had handy, and you'll simply want to put it on a paper towel or some sort of a rag and just start wiping the finish off the grips, and you'll see that it does take some off right there. Just keep doing that until you take off the majority of the finish that's on this gun. Now, I'll let you know that the wood itself is kind of dark, so it's not going to become white after taking this off, but it'll help prep it for refinishing with any sort of stain. This may remove some of the pencil marks we made earlier depending on how hard you scrub, so you can always put the grips back on and mark it again. We'll want to constantly put the grips back onto the gun as we're sanding to make sure we don't overdo anything. So you'll see me doing that here a lot in these next few clips is I'll sand a little bit and then I'll put it back on the gun. You can always take more off, but it's difficult, to say the least, to put more material on. So just take that extra bit of time to check it every little bit. And here I'm using, I think, 1200 grit sandpaper. You can use something a little more coarse, but be wary when doing so that you don't damage the wood or take too much wood away. And always work with the grain or you'll have some nasty scratches you'll have to take out much later. I also use a sanding block a little bit just to keep these edges square. You can wrap sandpaper around something or you can use an actual sanding block. Now at some point you'll want to be sure to do a legitimate test fit by putting both grips on and putting the screw back in. Now this is important because tightening the screw down all the way does shift the grips a little bit. And you want to make sure you get rid of any of that overhang or you want to make sure that you're not taking too much away that it rounds it out. So just do a complete test fit after a reasonable amount of time sanding to make sure it all fits nicely and feels clean. Here I've finished that step, so I'm ready to do the next part, which is to stain it. I've lightly sanded the entire grips, and I mean lightly sanded, again, with the grain, just to kind of open the pores up a little bit. I prefer Minwax. I've been using it forever. I recommend oil-based stains because they penetrate a lot better than water-based. And I just use a piece of paper towel. You can use a brush, but you don't really need to. And here you'll just apply it to the grips. Now don't be afraid to apply a lot of stain. It's better to put on too much than too little because it'll soak in. And any excess, you just wait 15 minutes and then remove it all. I am going to note that I'm using red oak stain. I wanted a stain that closely matched the original finish on these grips. You can totally change it up. You can use dark walnut, whatever, ebony, anything that you want. But I wanted this to look like it did before, but I wanted to reshape the grips and put a nice clear coat on top. You can also use this little trick here where you tighten the screw in to the outside of the grip, and it kind of helps you elevate it so you can reach some of those hard to reach places. Now don't be afraid to do this in two coats. It's totally fine to do that if you miss a spot. I just like to get it all done at once, and this helps speed that up. Now I've let it dry for about 15 minutes, and now you'll simply rub off that excess. You'll want to make sure to do this because if you leave it to dry, it will become very, very tacky, and it'll take about 2 days to completely dry. So please wipe off any excess stain that is left on these grips. Here they are after being completely wiped down. You may notice that the color is slightly darker than they started, which is kind of what I wanted, just a little bit darker. Now, if you want a nice flat finish, you can just stop here, wait a day, and then apply linseed oil, boiled linseed oil. That'll help to kind of waterproof the wood, but it won't be a nice shiny finish on top. I want to put a clear coat on this, so I'm going to do that in the next step. Now I'm getting ready to apply a nice clear coat finish to the top. I'm setting them down on paper towels, but I honestly can't really recommend that. Put them down on something that the stuff won't stick to. Here you can see me wiping them down with a, a nice rag to take off any dust or little wood shavings, anything at all, because otherwise they'll get trapped underneath this finish. I'm using polyacrylic and an inexpensive brush. I like polyacrylic because it makes a really nice hard finish, and it's a lot more forgiving than lacquer or shellac. Now, of course, you can use whatever you want. I'm using a semi-gloss here because I want a semi-gloss finish, and I'm simply applying it with a brush. You can use a foam brush. I think that'll yield the best and the cleanest results if used properly, but this is what I had handy, and I like to make do with what I have, so I'm using a simple little brush, applying it. Now, don't be too worried about getting the finish to look perfectly even. We can work on that later. You just want to make sure you cover everything. You know, all the edges, get those real nice, and make sure there's at least some finish on there. Now I've let that first coat dry for about 2 hours. You'll want to follow the directions of whatever stuff you use. So just read what's on the can. For polyacrylic, it's about 2 hours. And now I'm just going to kind of do a little test fit once again, just to kind of see how the finish looks. At this point, it's not too late to go back to a plain finish if that's what you want. So, you know, put them on, see if you like the way it looks for the most part, and go from there. I personally like the way that this finish feels. It actually provides a much better grip than that flat finish that the grips came with. It's kind of counterintuitive. You'd think that gloss would make it slippery, but that's actually not the case. And don't worry, it's unloaded, and I don't intend to shoot my coffee pot. Just having a little fun. Now you're ready to do some wet sanding. This is the fun part. You'll want to get a little cup or something with some water and fine grit sandpaper. I'm using the 1200 grit once again, and I'm just very lightly sanding the finish on here. Now you may be able to tell that the finish isn't perfectly even, which is why we're doing this. There will obviously be some brush marks on your first coat, maybe some bubbles, and the whole point of this step is to remove those and try to get it to a much nicer, kind of flatter finish. Now don't worry about getting it perfect. You don't want to take it down all the way to the wood. You just want to kind of lower some of the high spots, and you'll be applying another coat, that I can guarantee you. So you'll have an opportunity to kind of thicken up the finish once again and make it a little smoother even. Now you want to wipe it off and completely dry it, and here you can kind of see that it's not perfect, and that's okay. Like I said, we're going to apply another coat of this stuff and we'll make it perfect. Now that it's completely dry and wiped down again, we're going to apply that second coat. Now this time I'm going to be a little more careful to kind of create a smoother finish before sanding, so just spend a little extra time evening it out. This next step is completely optional. I like to use a little bit of heat, not the flame. I'm using the heat just to pop any little surface bubbles. Now before you do something like this, make sure the finish you're using isn't completely flammable, and I'm not responsible if you burn your house or your grips down. So you can also use a heat gun with low pressure, or something of that nature to just apply a little heat and melt these bubbles. Again, it's optional, not necessary. The grips have dried once again, and boy do they look nice. All this requires is a light sanding and a little polishing. If you're happy with the finish, you don't have to do anything. But I see there's a little overhang on the back, and here I am making a flat-edged sanding tool. I'm just using a wood shim. You can use a piece of wood, a ruler, anything flat, and just kind of rub the back of the grips against it to take off any overhang of shellac. So here I'm happy with the way the edges look. I think it looks nice. We're going to put them on the Revolver and see what we think. So, final test fit here, and it looks nice. It's a huge improvement over the grips before. I love the look of the shiny finish, and I love the grip it provides. It's a much better grip than that flat finish, and it'll help preserve the wood. So these grips should last as long as the Revolver itself. I hope you liked this video. Please like the video, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.